Welcome to the Joe Cohen Show. Join me as I share my experience with biohacking and invite top health experts to explore the latest technology, supplements, research, and resources for optimizing your body and brain. Hey everyone, I am going to be talking about a genetic report today. So today I'll be talking about Wild Health Report. This is just an example of some functional medicine practitioners that use it. And so what we did was we built a report that was similar, if not a lot better. We call it the 100X Wildly Healthy. What do we call it? Wildly Healthy Functional DNA Report. So I'll go through some of the issues that you deal with when you're looking at a report like this. We look at the diet and nutrition section. And a lot of the issues with these kinds of reports, these genetics products, is that they only look at very few variants. So you could see, for example, macronutrients, SNPs, your diet, nutrition, your genetic predisposition to fat, carbs, and saturated fat. It shows you the variants that it looks at for fat intolerance, for carb intolerance, and for saturated fat intolerance. There's many more variants that are related to this that are not covered here. So it's a very small number. They also give you the labs related to this stuff, which Self-Decode also does. They give you a number here, percentage of carbs, fats, proteins. Again, garbage in, garbage out. When you're dealing with a small number of SNPs, it really is not relevant. So I think for all these, fat intolerance, carb intolerance, saturated fat intolerance, it's not enough variants to be able to really predict what's going on. And they certainly have not validated this with any biobank or any data set, which is very important when you're doing this kind of stuff. Your macronutrients, you appear to, this is just a sample report, does not mine. You appear to tolerate saturated fat well and consume it as desired. You tolerate carbohydrates well and may consume complex carbs as desired. It doesn't say for what, actually. So most of these studies are actually talking about for weight. Does it say or desired weight gains? Okay, so furthermore, many people experience significant weight loss through macronutrient tracking. We're all different. So let's see. Does it to estimate the calories? Okay, gene, 2 risk alleles. This SNP is associated with BCAA concentrations. In the report that we have in Self-Decode, we're looking at way more variants for this stuff. Just looking at one SNP is not going to be relevant. There just isn't. The effect size is so small, and even if it were replicatable. Metabolism of vitamins. So we look at dietary folate, dietary protein. They have a chart, but they're not really telling you anything specific about that chart. Methylation status, borderline. Okay. So they tell you choline risk score based on a couple of variants. They tell you the folate risk score based on a couple of variants, and TMA score based on TMAO based on a couple of variants. Again, too little variance to really predict much here. And they give you all these. You could see that they're looking at one thing: choline, CHKA, vitamin A, BCO1, BCMO1. I think they're the same gene, actually, the same variant. Adore2A, caffeine. So you see that there's some of them that could be interesting. From hemochromatosis, you could look at one variant. But when you're talking about gluten, SH2B3 is not going to be good enough. Caffeine metabolism could be based on a few variants. There's very few things that could be, but most of them are not. When we look at this report, the problem that we're seeing is kryptonite foods, gluten sensitivity. You are sensitive to wheat and gluten. It's impossible to tell that based on a genetic test. You could say you're more likely to be sensitive, but it's impossible to tell that. It's giving you kryptonite foods. Wheat gluten leads to inflammation, vegetable oils and processed. I bet this is generic stuff. Sugar is inflammatory. This looks pretty generic. Optimal foods. This is just, it seems pretty generic, to be honest. Collagen, 2 risk alleles. The whole collagen system is so complex, there's no way one variant is doing that. Your superfood recommendations. It's going based on too little data to make recommendations based on food. Your exercise and recovery genomics and labs, strength, endurance, recovery. Again, it's looking at too little variants. There's so many things that are responsible for this and that Maybe the ACTN3 is going to be one that has more significance. But again, if we just look at this, it's too little variance. UCP1, it's a little hard to understand what's going on here also. Just from a user perspective, it's a little difficult. Exercise and recovery. I honestly wouldn't put any stock into these kind of things. They're not very sophisticated in terms of this stuff. Yeah, I don't know. There's no studies that show how you're going to change this based on some genetic variants. That's very difficult. In general, getting recommendations based on some genetic variant is not going to be very accurate. You need to include a lot more information, which is what we do there as well. Then detailed exercise and recovery genetics and labs. Okay. Again, they're looking at specific variants, and then they're just giving you some information. Personalized sleep plan. It doesn't seem too personalized, to be honest. Your circadian genetics. This is not going to be influenced by just a couple genes. One risk allele, you have an increased cancer risk associated with alterations in circadian rhythm. Don't eat when it's dark. Fast for at least 12. This is very simplistic. It's like you have this one SNP and therefore do this. And they're telling you generic things anyway, but still, it's not, I wouldn't call this real personalized health. They're looking at the neurobehavioral genetics. They're looking at COMT, BDNF, FAAH. AKT1 is not usually one looked at. It's really hard to make heads and tails from a report like this. It seems like they have, I don't know if this is genetics or this is actually a microbiome test. Chronic disease, dementia, insulin resistance score. There's no way they're going to get this from a couple variants. There's so many variants related to that. Dementia risk? No way. No way. They're going no ApoE provided in your genome. Not available. Dementia disease recommendations. So may require a longer reset period between training sessions associated with moderately increased levels of inflammation after strenuous exercise. Be mindful of your recovery. It's just the problem is that when I look at something like this, there's so much information that it's not an intelligent system that brings it all together in the recommendations first. It's okay, here's a risk allele, here's a recommendation, here's a risk allele, and you just get it's just crazy. There's too many recommendations. Gene IRS1, 2 risk alleles. Your insulin resistance recommendation. This SNP is associated with an increased risk of insulin resistance and diabetes in response to a diet high in fat. It is mitigated by a high carb and low fat diet. But then you're going to have other things that are going to say the opposite. Insulin resistance recommendations. This whole thing is, they give you the lab marker here, but your inflammation you have normal CRP. Okay, so they're mixing in some of the labs, which again, but they're not taking it into account in a holistic way. For example, to get a recommendation, you really need a sophisticated system that looks at not only specific variants, which is what they're doing. They're saying you have this variant, this recommendation. You also want to look at certain conditions, polygenic risks as a whole, goals. You want to look at lifestyle risks. You want to look at labs as well. And you want to program to comprehensively take all that information into account. The problem, and that's what self-decode does. The problem with this is it's just everything's piecemeal. You're not getting a recommendation based on everything together. It all seems piecemeal. You have this SNP, do this, and the effect is very small in the effect size. So it's a little problematic here. It's quite problematic with what they're doing. Recommended supplements. Yeah, this is 50 pages here, and it's just hard to make heads from tails about what's going on here. You got a SNP that does this and the SNP that does that. So I'll show you the self-decode report that we have here. Okay, so what we did here is, this is the 100x wildly healthy functional DNA report. So for people who like that report, again, we said, okay, how do we make this better? And we included all the stuff we included more polygenic risk scores. So for example here, diet, nutrition, we're looking at way more information for each of these things. So let's say this is a PDF. You could also have the interactive platform, which is much more interesting, if you will. Increased need for zinc. This is actually my result. So it says I have an increased need for zinc, lower activity of SOD2. This is diet and nutrition. We're categorizing this based on how they did. So diet and nutrition, they put collagen here, typical activity. We're looking at more variants typically, but again, yeah, so gluten sensitivity, typical likelihood, saturated fat response. Each of these things are a report on their own, and you could look at all the variants here. GSTP1, detox. This is how they categorize it. I think this is more easy to understand. Okay, in this, what do I need? I have an increased need for zinc, and I have likely lower SOD2. This could be found, you go into the DNA reports, summary reports, and then you click on the competitor section. I'll show you how to do that in a bit, but we're just looking at the PDF overview here. Folate and methylation, I've got a lot more issues here. Bad MTHFR, bad PEMT, lower ability for methylation, increased need for folate, higher levels of TMAO, lower activity of MTHFD1. Exercise and recovery, you could see that the oxidative stress, the SOD2, is the only thing that sticks out. So one of the things you see that's different is we make it more clear and we are more likely to have circadian rhythm imbalances. That's very interesting. So we just make it more clear what is the most important to look at. Whereas when I was looking at the other report, it was just not clear what I'm supposed to be looking at. Mood and behavior, low mood, BDNF, slightly lower levels. These are the things that are the most important for me. Microbiome, lower microbiome diversity, lower levels of bifidobacterium, and higher levels of TMAO. Now, if I actually go and think about these things for myself, these are all, I would say, true based on my testing. These would be true as well. This I could see being true. My circadian rhythm gets easily messed up. SOD2 I could see being true. And then definitely all this stuff related to folate and methylation. So I think this, and then diet and nutrition, zinc is definitely something that is I get easily deficient. When it comes to me, this stuff is pretty accurate here. Mood and behavior, this is good. Okay, health conditions, cognitive decline, more likely. It's hard to know, but I did have brain fog at an early age. Longevity, cognitive decline, BDNF, UCP1, mitochondrial health. Interesting. So this is interesting stuff. It sorts it based on what's most interesting. And then it gives you recommendations, but these recommendations are actually based on a lot of information, not just one thing. If we look at, for example, oh, by the way, so it's going to look at, it goes more in depth, by the way. If we want to look at that more in depth, you could see how many variants we looked at for each thing. And you could see it's not just one variant. This one looked at 6 variants, zinc. SOD2 looked at 2 variants. Again, they're going to be looking at different numbers of variants. Carbohydrate metabolism, 16 variants. And we tell you which ones we looked at here, which ones are risky, which ones are the risk alleles. But we give you the overall response. Saturated fat, we look at 42 variants. We give you all the variants that are related. And again, you could see it's much more variants. Even though I have a lot of risks here, but because we're looking at a whole bunch of variants, these are just looking at the negative variants. But because I have a lot of other variants that are counterbalancing that, the actual over risk is not more than typical. So you can look at something like this and be like, oh, wow, there's a lot of risk variants, but actually it's not more than typical. Gluten sensitivity, this is celiac. We're looking at 1 million variants here. And I actually have typical likelihood for celiac. Vitamin A, we're looking at 3 variants. This one, I think we just looked at the same variants they're looking at. So collagen, its minor allele has been associated with tennis elbow, Achilles tendon injury, but we have reports on all of these actually. Vitamin D is 1,766 variants. So this is not just looking at one variant or 2. Omega-3 is based on 54 genetic variants. Vitamin E is based on 4 genetic variants. You can see that it depends on the model. Iron overload, like I mentioned, there's only a few variants that are actually quite important for that. That's hemochromatosis. Vitamin C is 196,000 variants. Vitamin B12 is a million genetic variants. And so you could see which genes and all that stuff that you would want to know for each one. And it goes into all the details here. Now, you could also look at the interactive platform. And this is just a PDF. And and the recommendations, I'll show you the recommendations here. So we saw an overview of the recommendations, but it goes into the details. So if we look at, for example, recommendation details, psychodynamic therapy, I'm not even sure what this is, but this is interesting. This is for mood. It shows what it's good for. Strength training is a recommendation, shows that it's good for what it's good for. Probiotics, what it's good for. So if we see here, probiotics, it helps with cognitive decline, low mood. There's also specific genetic variants that we're including here. Helps with bifidobacterium, gut microbiome diversity, TMAO, sunlight exposure. So you could see in people with your genetic variant, the lack of light exposure may cause mood problems. But the thing here is that these are sorted based on a lot of information in the background. We're showing you some key highlights, how it helps, but actually there's a lot more information in the background. In this case, you could see, for example, this helps slow mood, but it also has this 5-HTP. It comes up here. And actually, it's one of my favorite supplements. Sunlight exposure. I actually like all these recommendations so far. Strength training. Some of them I want to do more research on because I'm not sure what psychodynamic therapy is. But DHEA, morning bright light. I could use more of this. Yeah, it gives you the logic of why you should be doing these things. Sometimes it gives you specific genetic variants. Tryptophan is a very good one. I like that. And so that's how, that's our report. And I'll show you how it looks, how to get there. So people ask me, how do you get to these reports? You go to DNA reports, summary, and competitor reports. Show you. We're actually going to change this. We're going to put competitor reports in the DNA plus section. Competitor reports, and then you have to know what you're looking for. In this case, it's called the Wildly Healthy, and that's we just looked at the Wild Health Report. We said, okay, this is the interactive version. Pretty similar, but it's more interactive. Let's dive into the details. This is showing the details. You could look at each individual report on its own, which goes into even more details. You can look at the overall recommendations, and you can see how each recommendation, what it helps with. So in this case, helping with mood. Yeah, what each recommendation is helping with. And you could, let's see. So yeah, you go to summary here. You go to summary and competitor reports, competitor. We're going to put this in its own section here. But the idea is what we have here. We have every genetics report. If you're interested in anyone's, I think we have, anytime we get a request, we just make it. But we got a request for this Wild Health one because they were practitioners that were doing that. And we just made it. And I think it's a better report. It's more intelligent. And yeah, I think it's better. Okay. Sounds good. Thank you. Please like and subscribe, and I will do more of these if you like them. This is going over specific genetic reports, and this time we did the Wild Health one, but I could go over other ones if that is interesting. Have a great day. 67% of listeners aren't subscribed to the show, so please don't forget to show your support by hitting the subscribe button now. You'll not only be supporting the show, but also investing in yourself and your health journey, all while helping to keep us ad-free.